Welcome, Marth.
Hi.
Hello. So maybe we can start by you introducing yourself, your practice. You have a very interesting focus in preventing cancer relapse. And maybe you could, maybe you could describe
So,
how did you get into this?
yeah. I'm a naturopathic doctor and my name's Martha Sharpe. I practice in Ontario. I'm out of Barrie and I do have my practice focused right now on adjunctive cancer care, which means supportive cancer integrative support at any phase of cancer care, whether it is prevention, active treatment, survivorship, sort of active recovery, which maybe we'll get into today why there should be an active recovery phase. But my passion really is in survivorship because it is such a gap in that cancer experience that I not only felt myself, I have also been through cancer. So that sort of was a focus of mine weirdly before I got diagnosed. But then after going through the cancer process and treatment and all of that, it became just glaringly clear that we are falling through the gaps at certain parts of care. There's such an active component of care for treatment and that kind of thing. But a lot of people feel really, for lack of a better word, abandoned post-treatment when they're discharged from their oncology teams. So that is why I'm so passionate about filling this gap in care, because naturopathic medicine is so perfectly suited to work with people in that phase anyway, because naturopathic medicine is so focused on education and prevention and a holistic approach to health, looking at how different parts of the body are interconnected, how your gut microbiome can impact immune function and hormone metabolites and all of these sorts of things that people just sometimes aren't getting that information in that non-integrative setting. So that is why I'm so passionate. I know people prior to me having that experience were always talking about they just had no idea where to even start after cancer. And then I had a similar experience myself. So here we are.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Just,
And it's something that like we don't think about, right? Because we hear a lot about the active treatment phase, possibly
Mhm.
prevention in general, but then, and I guess what I understand of it all is that when you have cancer, that you have this team that's geared around treating the cancer. But what we do as NDs is we treat the person. So, after cancer, you're still a person with maybe now more unique health needs, but you still have a microbiome, you still have mental health, hormonal health, and how do all these things contribute to you staying well? And so it's like now's you can still continue the journey of health despite the cancer being gone. Um,
Well, and I think it's just such a strange time for people because, and interestingly, they've done a lot of different studies looking at this. In particular, one that is jumping out at me is, I think it was from 2014. Anyway, doesn't really matter, but I think it was an ASCO, so American Society of Clinical Oncology. They did a survey of some primary care providers, because people generally, once they're discharged from their oncology teams, they'll obviously go back to their family general practitioner. But a lot of the time, that general practitioner doesn't know a lot about survivorship. So this one survey was looking at how many primary care providers knew about, for example, the cardiac adverse events and long-term sort of potential adverse events from anthracyclines, which are a really common family of medications used in different chemotherapy regimens.
Mm.
And I think only half of them around there knew about that. And we know that and anthracyclines are used very commonly in breast cancer treatment, at least much of the time right now. And we know that cardiovascular disease is the most important sort of long-term adverse effect of breast cancer treatment because of that cardiotoxicity. So it's challenging when your primary care providers aren't sort of filling those needs that you have, or addressing those needs that you have from a long-term perspective. So there's so many reasons why there are such gaps in care. There's sort of lack of resources from a primary care provider perspective, and lack of education. There really needs to be so much more sort of continuing education there. And then there's lack of sort of, it's such a heterogeneous thing, cancer in itself, let alone cancer survivorship, because I mean, cancer alone it's not really the same thing between each person, depending on the cancer type. It's actually quite heterogeneous, and different types of sort of things that are going on. It doesn't all behave the same. It doesn't all, occur in the same types of tissue and that kind of thing. And then for cancer survivorship, you have all of that, plus the vast difference in treatments that people are getting and all of that. So it's really challenging to study cancer survivorship, because it is quite heterogeneous. And are we talking about someone who's done treatment and sort of no evidence of disease? Are we talking about someone who has a high risk of recurrence? Are we talking about someone who's living with long-term cancer? So it's quite a challenging gap to fill conventionally. And again, when people come out, they are really looking for more that sort of deeper sense of awareness and education about their bodies and what's going on underneath it all. And I think really that's where, again, naturopathic medicine is so great at educating people and working in that space anyway. So it's such a fantastic opportunity for naturopaths to work with in that cancer survivorship setting.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, even just I'm thinking about, patients who've had breast cancer, and it depends on, is it estrogen receptor positive, HER2 receptor, and so they may be on just like long-term ongoing medication to manage their hormones, but what impact does that have, like you said, on cardiovascular health, on hormonal health? What are the considerations? As a ND, I had to do, I don't focus on cancer, but I had to do research like, what, is flaxseed or phytoestrogens beneficial? Is it harmful? And like looking at that research, but it's all very new, like you said. So it's not like it's percolated into mainstream general guidelines for general practitioners. And a lot of things are like that. Like a lot of medicine is highly specialized, acute, focused, specific care. And then once the emergency is over, then it's like, okay, now you no longer need an oncology team, go back to your general practitioner, but the general practitioner is relying on guidelines that have been established over 20 years. And a lot of stuff is very new and emerging, and you have to really be on top of it, which is, a lot to ask of a GP with a very busy practice of many different patients with many different needs,
There should be absolutely more. You could say this about any chronic disease, really. We really need a different approach to healthcare. It's becoming very clear, in particular, with the pandemic. It's just highlighted so many, problems or inefficiencies is a better way of putting that. I mean, with any chronic disease, there you're right. I mean, you meet with your primary care provider for maybe 15 minutes, maybe 30. You know, how much are you really integrating and learning and sort of moving forward in that time? But we really need programming. And you again, you could say this about any chronic disease. We need more education, and this is where group programming is becoming exciting. I know it's not really the norm. I don't know if you do group programming in your practice. I don't yet, but it's something I'm really excited about because there's that sense of community. You can have longer time with people, and there can be such an education focus, and because people want to understand their blood work and what it means, and the impact on the rest of their system, and all of that. But to do that in one-on-one care is so challenging. But that's where we really need, in any chronic disease, right, to focus, is people understanding, because people are smart, and patients are more educated than they've ever been because of social media. And maybe that's not the best place to get information, but I mean, the access to information is so much, it's so much more accessible. So people are coming in with these great questions, but they're just getting lost in translation almost, which is a
Yeah, like,
big
I mean, like a big part of
survivorship.
our education, right? Like it's not the facts so much that we hold, which I think in the past, a medical doctor that went to all of this school, or like a health professional, was the possessor of these golden facts. And so you would go and you would get the facts like bestowed upon you, or you knew this person just had this special knowledge, and then with that they would make decisions that would benefit you. But now we're in this information age where you have access to any fact. You could find a paper in the most obscure journal. You could, find the person doing this very like specific work who has a blog. And so it's all about, I think, what our education and what education should be teaching people now is like, how do you weigh the facts? How do you decide what to believe, how to apply something to you specifically, what's relevant, what's irrelevant, what comes first? How do you take all this information and create a strategy or a plan? And I went on this whole rant in my last podcast about how, the healthcare system, your doctor wants you to be empowered and informed and ask good questions. I think because people are often scared, right, to challenge their doctor, or to come across as ignorant, or to not know the right questions, or to question things. And I think within a 15-minute visit, maybe the practitioner could feel frustrated. But if you have very specific, clear questions, like just the example I used was like, what is my 10-year Framingham risk? That type of question tells your doctor that you know what you're talking about. And it resonates with them because they also know what that is. It's a relevant question, and so it starts a conversation that it could be really impactful and really help you as an advocate of your own health. And so there's this huge education piece that I think is so important. But like you said, if you're going to do that in one-to-one, it becomes very repetitive for the practitioner and very expensive for the patient. And a lot of it is universal. Like you could sign up for a course of whatever it is, 8 hours of education with materials, and then get walked through the process of knowing how to ask questions, knowing how to apply information to you personally, get this general idea about, lifestyle and diet, what the research says, and things that most people have questions about. Yeah. And you get the benefit of the group as well, the support.
Well, and I think that we've talked about this before, but I think that people, because there's so much more aware and educated and empowered these days, it's not that we sort of don't know what to do, right? We all know to some extent, we should be moving our bodies more. We need good sleep. we need to reduce our stress, eat well, da 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 da. But it's a matter of all of this misinformation out there, how to navigate it and how to make it a plan going forward and have a strategy. Because while yes, all of those lifestyle pieces are pretty in more often than not universal, right? They would be beneficial to most people. It's about meeting you where you are. And people, I think, try to take on, maybe not consciously, but we need, where I'm going with this is we need strategy, because there's a nuanced, everyone's health should is nuanced and it's individual to them. And does it make more sense for the person sitting in front of you to be focusing on, you know, making a few dietary changes that might make them, help them regulate their blood sugar and improve fatigue and mood even? I mean, I know that's a big conversation that you always love to have, is the impact on food and mental health and mood and all of that. Food really can have that kind of impact for people, and fatigue and all of this kind of stuff. But it's a matter of, where do you even start? So I think that's why working with an integrative provider who has that sort of bigger picture approach is so fantastic. And then leaning on some of these programs, because there are some great programs out there right now. And anything under the sun you can find a program on. But having a strategy and also leaning on that education piece, I think that's where people get the most benefit from whatever goal they're trying to reach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really good point, right? It's misinformation, but it's not even so much that it's wrong in every case, but that it lacks the context to apply it to the person in particular. So a lot of, like, you know, I mean, a good practitioner starts working one-to-one and then expands that knowledge to a group and then makes an Instagram post, right? And it's not going to apply to everyone. And so, and then I also think, like, if you have 10 units of will and energy to dedicate to a new habit or a new goal in your day, if you're spending 6 of those units on obtaining organic celery, buying a juicer, juicing every morning before eating, is that a good allotment of that willpower? Like, is celery juice bad? No. Is it the thing you should be spending your energy and your commitment and your habit change, which takes a lot of work? Is that going to have the biggest impact on your health? Or is there something else? Maybe it will. Maybe you need to hydrate. Maybe you have a celery deficiency. I don't know. But more likely, a practitioner with a holistic mindset who's looking at you and understands your goals and is taking the time to listen and ask about all the different factors. It's like, you know what, if you got these 10 units of will, let's put, 4 towards improving your sleep and 6 towards improving your protein, which is not the only dietary thing to focus on, but that's the one that would have the biggest impact now. And that's what we're going to start to build your healthy diet on, because it's going to have the biggest impact on your sleep, on your energy, on your blood sugar, on your insulin. And that's not something that you might get from Instagram. Like, you might get the eat more meat people on Instagram, but it lacks the context again, right? Because you're going to hear other people say, no, meat's bad for you. Or you're going to hear, it's cruel. Like, so there's too much information that doesn't have the right context. And at least with a practitioner, you can sit one-to-one and say, okay, like, this is why I think protein would be a good thing for you to focus on. How do you feel about that? What types of protein foods do you like? How might you incorporate that into your breakfast, lunch, dinner? Do you eat animals or not? Okay. All of that conversation. It's super nuanced. And like you said, what did you say? It's not like elegant or exciting. Sometimes it's like, this is how you boil lentils.
Well, and it reminds me of this great, I wish I saved it. Anyway, it was a great Instagram post of someone just kind of poking fun, because the Instagram's about that sort of, but about the diet, the nutrition industry. And so it was someone saying, oh, I don't eat pasta because grains are bad for you. And then the next person says, oh, I don't eat, or sorry, don't eat pasta, grains are bad for you, I eat lentils instead. And then the next person is giving a reason why they don't eat lentils, but they eat carnivore diet instead. Anyway, and it actually circled back to, I don't eat something, but I eat pasta. So it's full circle sort of. It was such a great explanation of our modern world. And I think it kind of reminds me of, so many people think that they need to be removing things.
Yeah.
And that is the answer, is restriction here, restriction there, and motivating themselves up for a 1 month restriction of what have you. And it's so restriction focused for some reason. Our modern sort of, health world. And it's quite this toxic culture of always
Denial.
wanting to restrict, or at least thinking that that is the answer for whatever health issues that you're wanting to resolve. And it brings you back to talking to people about, and this is like, I think I have this conversation every single day with people about what is the opposite of restriction. It's nourishment. And like, what does nourishment even mean, and what does that look like from like a human perspective? Because we are animals, right? We are living things, and what are the things that actually feed us as like biological units that are living in somewhat of a coherence, although you could argue that these days we're very disconnected in many ways from the natural world. But we're an ecosystem. Like, we are our environment, and our environment is us, right, to some extent. So I find that a lot of my conversations with people when we're talking about any health goal, to be honest, is about how can we be putting things back in. And I love that you were talking about, if you have those 10 units of time, what can you actually put in, and where can you be allocating your resources? But really, I think most of us as naturopathic doctors are approaching it from a, what can you put in and like feed yourself with and nourish yourself with, whether that is by that idea of food as fuel and not the enemy. I mean, we have this really awful view of food these days. And there are different reasons for that, for sure. Our food industry is very different than it used to be. And there, we could have a whole hour just on the problems with the food industry, and where we get our food and where we think food comes from, which is not always true, and that kind of thing. But just that mindset shift from food as the enemy to food as fuel, and that sort of positive nourishment. What things can build you up versus what are you wanting to strip away all the time to make you more of a healthy person, whatever that means,
Yeah, it's a really good point, right? It's like, it's what can we add first? Like, if we think of, your body has certain requirements, and a lot of us are operating from a deficiency. And is that so a practitioner can, this is the thing I love about naturopathic medicine, in in addition to our principles of individualized medicine, root cause, is that we work ground, like a good practitioner can work ground up, like start with the person and you go from there, right? And so versus top down cookbook approach, there's room for creativity, there's room to apply more recent research. You can start with the basics and the general sort of guidelines, and then you apply the individuality of the person. So you can look at the person and say, you know, I'm like, and we have all these different modalities, like traditional Chinese medicine, they see things at a very basic level in terms of excess and deficiency. And most people that we would apply these concepts to, I never really met an excess person. I don't know about you, in my practice or in the world or in
I
any of
really
our
get it.
classmates, we were all deficient. And so when you think about that, it's like, maybe there is an obstacle to cure. Maybe there is something in the way of good health. But if in someone who's deficient, you have to ask, could that person potentially, if they had the ingredients required, could they remove that obstacle? Like an example I'm just thinking is like liver function, you know, if your liver has the nutrients it needs or your gut has the nutrients it needs to function, could it then digest the different things you think you're sensitive to, right? Support the terrain is another way of saying that, I guess. So yeah, I often find that people are more deficient than they are excess, and often what they think they are doing in excess is the result of a deficiency. And that's where like protein comes in, because and
Yeah,
there's a study, like for people that care about calories, there's a study that when people increased their protein, they ate 400 calories less without trying, which is just an example of how we think, you know, we need to be restricting, but we're probably just deficient in something. And that's why we're seeing an excess consumption of another thing as a compensation. So that's often the case that I see.
Well, and that's a good sort of, I like that example because it also highlights the fact that, and this happens all the time, where you move the balance on one thing and it has all of these downstream effects. In particular on the terrain, like you said, that's something I talk to people all of the time about, or at least try to in my practice, because with a focus on cancer survivorship and that kind of thing, people are always asking, why did I get cancer? And there is no reason.
What
And
did
you
I do wrong? Right? What sin
exactly.
did I
And
commit? Mm-hmm.
yeah, and anyone can get cancer.
Mm-hmm.
You can be doing everything right. I'm doing this in quotations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and still get cancer. I mean, it's a total I was going to say free for all, but that's not really the right way of saying that. But it's just, we can be doing all of the things that we think are beneficial and you can still get cancer. So there's no one cause, but one of the biggest sort of areas that I loved that the updated World Cancer Research Fund report talked about was all of these sort of terrain pieces. You can have exogenous factors that can contribute to health. This is not cancer specific. And you can have which are outside of you, exogenous meaning outside, and you can have endogenous factors meaning inside, so things that are going on inside of your body. And while exogenous factors are incredibly important, and oh my gosh, I could talk for another whole episode about my frustration with our dependence on the chemical industry and how there is so much growing, at least, data on the problems with a lot of these chemicals that we're consuming on a day-to-day basis or being exposed to. Consuming meaning either you're absorbing it through the skin or inhaling, or that's what I meant by consuming.
Yeah.
Just being exposed to, and we there a lot of them are linked to cancer risk, let alone so many other risk factors like infertility. I mean, there are a lot of fantastic people speaking out about that right now. But there are all of these endogenous factors as well that we sort of don't talk about as much. And some of it, because terrain plays a big role in driving carcinogenesis, which is just that process of cancer development. I mean, we know that only 5 to 10% of cancers are truly genetically caused, meaning the rest of them are epigenetically caused. And epigenetics just kind of means that world outside, anything outside of our genes that impacts genetic expression. So that can be the air we breathe, the food we eat, movement, the thoughts we think actually can impact genetic expression, interestingly. And all of those things are this big soup that is, because that's the other thing. We always are micro focused in this reduction. We've been trained in our schooling to think about, we have this reductionist approach to thinking in many situations, and we've lost that sort of bigger picture perspective and thinking. In particular, when it comes to our health, we think, I'm going to do your example, the celery juice, and like that is the answer, right?
Yeah, that'll be it.
It's not the whole bigger picture of what's going on in my life. It's the celery juice, right? We have such this tendency of getting super reductionist, but when we look at terrain from a big picture perspective, which is just the soil of our body, really, that's how you can think of terrain, is the soil of something. It does play a big role. So things like insulin resistance is a risk factor for some types of driving some types of cancers. Chronic inflammation, because it's associated with DNA and tissue damage, oxidative stress going on. We have our whole metabolic state underneath it all. We have our microbiome health, mitochondrial, and all of these sort of things. And it's sort of not very productive, as you mentioned, to focus on one thing. But if you have that bigger picture approach, you can make small changes that have these really profound ripple effects on the whole system. And I think that's so important for people to sort of understand, is you can make actually small lifestyle changes, or small-ish, and have this profound effect over time. But it's more of a, and again, we were talking about this earlier, it's not necessarily a destination either. It's more about lifestyle medicine and how we are living our day-to-day lives, and how can we nourish ourselves from all aspects, not just biological, meaning like the food and water we're consuming, but our stress management, our sleep patterns. How can we nourish and build ourselves up from all of these different standpoints? Not that you have to focus on all of them right off the bat. Again, that's where strategy is so crucial, because you just get overwhelmed and don't do anything. I mean, I, as a naturopath, do that all the time. I try and like take on 10 new things that I think are, so important. And then I drop them all in like 2 weeks and then don't do anything. It's about as that strategy that you talked about, but with that long game mentality, because we're so also wanting that quick fix and that quick answer to something that really is often, at least a big contributing part, is lifestyle and how we are being and sort of going through our days, which is very boring to say. Like, the magic is how you get through your days. It's really, but it's hard. It's actually hard to make. It's the simplest things can be the hardest, because they're really boring. And it means you have to, it's that long game.
Hmm.
approach.
Yeah, they're really boring 3 months in. Then that's where you hit the
Very,
like
yes,
dark night of the
very
soul, where
well.
you're like, when the results are not coming in as fast. But
Yeah.
one thing I want to respond to, so because I say this all the time in my, let's call it like marketing and how I talk to patients, or how I talk about things, factors, right? We always say like exogenous factors, endogenous factors. And for my master's, my course right now is diversity. And so we were spending, a couple of weeks talking about this concept of worldview
Okay.
and how different cultures see the world, and how we in the West and in science, especially, and in Western medicine, we follow sort of Aristotle's cause and effect, like one factor, one result,
Right.
and so like I show up with these vegetables and I make a soup. And you're like, no, you have all these different factors: celery, a kitchen, a flame, the gas that gets lit, or the electricity from your house, your will to cook the soup, your imagination, your hunger, how the onions and the meat combine, and the water, and then the love, that like grandma's special recipe, she puts the love in. What about that? The secret X factor. And maybe you don't want to make soup because it's summer, so there's no soup at all. And our body is a billion times more complicated than that, to the point that we actually don't, there's a million factors that we have no idea about. And when I think of like the chemicals, like patients will ask me, they're like, what about like environmental medicine, and like what about the toxins? And and I'm like, honestly, it's been an area of medicine that I know is really relevant and important, but it feels so disempowering. And the fact is that it's so complicated to study, and that's a big problem. And I think of like the medieval kings that would develop a tolerance to arsenic so they could avoid poisoning. I sometimes tell my patients about this, because we do have an ability to tolerate our environment. But what happens when you combine unknown genetic factors, epigenetic factors, the stress, the mindset, the chemicals in their specific way, impaired detox pathways, grief? So this idea of factors is really important, and it's very difficult for a Western mind, maybe a human mind in general, to really get their head around, which is, and I think even we had a challenge. I mean, obviously as NDs, we're more holistically minded, so we're into this idea of this holistic, collectivist, sort of multifactorial approach, like bottom up, how we're connected to nature, how we don't exist in isolation, how every individual is different and unique and has their own specific set of factors. So we're very into this, but it's even difficult for us to really embody that in a very cause and effect, like linear Western mindset. We're essentially talking about like pattern consciousness, and like kind of a collective consciousness of like looking at all these different things. So there's a lot of like secret sauce in the process of like working with someone, the therapeutic relationship of like, I just get a sense that, you know protein is the place to start, or maybe we got to focus on sleep, and like, maybe you have to, a bedtime routine is going to have the biggest impact. And so how do you take this whole pattern and then help boil it down to make it a tangible uh suggestion that you could give to somebody that will help move that overall pattern in a favorable direction, right? And so this is, I think, so different than what I would expect my family doctor to look at my health with, um based on the time, the tools, the worldview, and so I think this idea of philosophy, like we think like you get a doctor, you get an appointment, the person's looking at you, they're asking a lot of the same questions, it looks the same, but understanding that there's a very different worldview and attention that's going on, and that it's probably, like, at least in my mind, it's more in line with reality. Like nature and our bodies are very, very complicated. And we're thinking about something like cancer. It's an extremely complicated process, many different types, different tissues, different considerations, factors, and then within those factors there's controllable and uncontrollable. So you know can we, like, what do you do about the uncontrollable? And then what can we do about the controllable that we know, and the known and unknown, and like that whole the graph that you have, the pie or whatever, not the table of like known controllable, unknown controllable,
Right.
you know. And
Such a gray area, right? And I think that we want things to be black and white.
mhm,
And we're used to that, right?
yeah,
That's literally how we were conditioned to think in school,
exactly.
is there's one answer, and it was very much that black and white. And it's easier for us to exist in black and white because in our modern world, we just have so many other things going on that to live in the gray or that unknown or that multiple things causing something is just challenging for us. And I think that brings up the concept of resilience too. In particular, going back to what you said about this sort of general deficiency that most of us are living in because we're just a product of our very stressful, low grade, chronic, stressful world, you know. But that concept of resilience and how can you, working with a provider, is so valuable, even as a healthcare provider. Like I have a number of my own healthcare providers because it's really hard to see the patterns in yourself when you're in it, right? It's like why you always go to your best friend for advice is because they are looking outside, they're seeing it from that bird's eye view and can see maybe the obstacles or different patterns that you might be so glaringly obvious to other people, but that you can't see. So that's why working with someone to develop these strategies is so helpful, even if you are incredibly health conscious, right? Because it's that external sort of, what patterns can we see? But it's all about going back to the environmental toxins, which is like so challenging.
Yeah,
And I'm actually
stressful.
developing a course this spring all about detoxification and you know, certain environmental exposures and stuff like that. But it's incredibly overwhelming to even exist and like reading about it all right now. But I think that was a really good point that you made, though, is it is very disempowering even talking about that. And so no one talks about it, right? It's literally the elephant in the room or one of the biggest ones. And healthcare providers know it's a problem, but you're right. How do you even start talking about it?
I know.
Because what do you even do about it? But
And there's always more you could be doing. That's the thing too that
yeah,
stresses me out. Yeah.
absolutely. But then there's that flip side, that mindset flip again, where, okay, we might not have control over many factors in our world, and not just from a cancer perspective, from any perspective. But what can we do about it? We can build up our resilience and fuel our bodies in a way that can make us more resilient to some of these exposures, whether it is promoting detoxification or optimizing our detoxification pathways. I mean, what does that even mean, really? But I mean, so many people that I work with, for example, are constipated and
Yeah.
have had long-term chronic constipation.
Yeah.
And that is one of the first things that we work on, because you're going to reabsorb a lot of those, even your own metabolic, I don't love the word toxic, but toxic byproducts. They're literally just your own byproducts of metabolism, but they are considered, you know, you want to be excreting those. They're not great to be reabsorbing, but constipation is a
Yeah.
huge risk factor there. And that's such a simple
Yeah.
simple
Yeah.
but
I
from like
mean,
an
yeah.
overall perspective,
Yeah.
that is such a great way to build resilience, is just optimizing bowel movements and flow. And I mean, there's this word no one really uses it anymore, but we call, you know what this word is because you're a naturopathic, but the emunctories,
Yeah.
which are our organs of elimination. I think I said that the other day to my dad, who was a medical doctor, and he was like, "What are you talking about?" But
That's like
anyway,
old school
kind of
medicine.
an old
Yeah.
school word.
Yeah. They were all
Um,
about that, the emunctories, like the conventional
no,
system. They like that's where it's from.
and
Yeah.
there, you want movement, and I think also from a Chinese medicine perspective,
Yeah,
which
letting it
is
all go.
always just so
Yeah, hydration, constipation, like when we're talking about detoxification, it's not like like a weight loss tea, or cut it all
exactly.
out and just juice,
Thank you for clarifying that, because it's
Yeah.
not about that, it's about movement. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of us see from that, at least in my practice, I see a lot of, again, like you, that deficiency overall, just burnt out people,
Mhm.
and a lot of stagnation. Again, that's more of
Yeah.
that traditional Chinese medicine
Mhm.
concept, but I mean, look at our modern world. We're sedentary for most of the day, meaning we're not moving. We are, constipated. We are not sweating a lot as much as we used
Right.
to. We're inside and bundled up a lot, even in the summer, right? A lot of people are inside all day where there's no movement. And
Yeah.
and I think that's
We're not
part of the
breathing. You detox
conversation.
through your lungs. Yeah. We're
Yeah,
like,
again, we're not, we shallowly breathe, like
mhm.
we're not moving our emunctories. That's not really the right way of saying that, but we're not sort of engaging in enough movement in these organs of elimination for the most part. I would say for most people, it's not obviously
Mhm.
relevant to everybody, but that is such a
Mhm.
fascinating way and simple, again in quotes, way of improving resilience and just increasing vitality and stuff like that. But being done in a way, this is a good point actually, and it's something that I see a lot in practice because of the survivorship piece. But people think that exercise should and needs to be like high intensity cardio.
Yeah.
And if you put many of the cancer survivors that I work with into an exercise program that is focused on high intensity, even moderate intensity cardio, they would, I mean, as an example, there's someone that I worked with that she was recommended to be doing whatever this high intensity interval training regimen, which was not appropriate. And it would take her a week to recover in between
Mhm.
each of her once weekly exercise, like 30-minute, because it wasn't appropriate for what she needed at that time.
Mhm.
So I think that's also important to talk about is we think, we have this idea of
Mhm.
something in our head and it has to be that way or else it's not enough.
Mhm.
So we just, if we're not going to do it right, why do it? But that's not really how building resilience and building health works. There's this
Yeah.
ebb and flow to things, and there's a time and place for things and different interventions. And if you are someone with, you know, in a current state of profound depression
Mhm.
where you cannot get out of your bed, I mean, doing a high intensity interval, that is totally the wrong approach.
Mhm.
Know what I mean? There's a time and a
Mhm.
place for, we are dynamic beings and
Yeah.
nothing is ever perfectly or the right exact regimen for us at every time in our lives. And I think we need to be gentle with ourselves and remember that too, because I mean,
Mhm.
I've definitely been through periods where if I do the same movement or even dietary pattern that I do most of the time, I would be miserable.
Yeah.
There's that is important too, is
Yeah, I just actually
ebb
like
and
came to
flow
terms.
of things, right?
Yeah. Like I
It
was
makes
looking, oh, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
Sure. I was going to say it just really quickly. It makes me think of I was at a conference recently where Asha Frost, she is a Canadian Indigenous
She's on the
healer.
podcast, everyone, by the way. So there's an
Oh,
episode with her. Yeah.
know
Yeah.
that. Yay.
Yeah. Yeah. She's great.
She's so great. But anyway, her talk was all about it was a business conference. So, but the talk was all about the seasons. And we think about seasons with respect to many other things, but not really our businesses. Anyway, that was the point of the talk. But she was saying we always there is or should always be a time of that hibernation and rest and sort of pause. And we never get that in our modern world because we're always in this upward sort of, I'm thinking of a conveyor belt. It's like
Yeah.
we're just on this conveyor belt that's going at the same mouse wheel speed up to what is the destination at the top? Who knows? And then is that it? I don't know. It's a strange thing to think about life as that. But anyway, she was talking about it more in this cyclical, circular fashion where it's so important to embrace the rest and the pause and contemplation. And that's where our creativity sort of explodes anyway, is in that time of introspection. Anyway, but I loved that, using that analogy with people in visits about their health, and there's always sort of an ebb and flow to how they're going to be feeling and where they are on their health journey.
Yeah. When is it like, do we just need to like remotivate and like that 3 months
Yeah.
in thing, is it time to remotivate or is it time to switch it up? But continue to be committed to the goal, or whatever you want to call it, that pattern shift or whatever the objective, the intention. Like, are we still on our path? You know? I was just gonna say, like, I recently came, so I'm all about strength training, muscle building,
Yeah,
and I recently came to terms with, I was looking at Instagram and I was like, I don't want to go to a gym. I think they're ugly. I think they smell. They're not. So there's other element to exercise where it's like, do you think the place that you move your body in is beautiful? Are you having fun? Play? Do you feel free in your body? Do you feel expressive? There's all these other elements, like we're talking about this sort of Eastern, like holistic, like even Indigenous worldview of our cycles and all of the elements. It's like, it's not, I could go for a hike in the woods all day. I could surf all day. I could do 30 minutes, maybe on a good day, an hour of yoga, but depends on the set and setting for that as well. If it's like at home, 30 minutes, you're not going to get longer out of me with a video. But but like if I'm in a studio, I could maybe do 2 hours. It depends on the instructor and the intention. And it's like, I don't know if I would have, probably through some coaching and working through a therapeutic relationship, I would have really understood that. And then it would have eliminated all of that mental fuzz around, I should be lifting heavy weights. I should be doing, really heavy, short rep type weight stuff. I got to go to a gym for that. How am I going to get to a gym? Oh, the reason I'm not really doing weight bearing exercise is because I'm not in a gym. But being able to know, like, I love walking and that is sufficient. And if that's what I do in a day, like, and what does my body want? And maybe, and every now and then I'll do a bunch of squats and I'll grab a 10-pound weight, or sometimes I will be like, I just want to go to that stinky gym in my condo to lift something heavier. Like, but I'm not going to do that every day. So if somebody is asking me, and then if I know I won't and why I won't and what I need instead to move my body every day, then I can honestly say to a practitioner, I'm not going to go to this isn't going to be a good solution for me. And it's not because of a personal failing I have. It's not because I lack willpower. It's not because I'm not motivated. It's not because I don't like movement or exercise. It's because I want to be in a beautiful place. I want to feel a certain way in my body. I want, and And so sometimes it takes a little bit of exploration and discovery in terms of what is the right, if you haven't done a lot of movement in your life, what is the right thing? And sometimes it's that, it's like this sort of process with somebody of like, sign up for an intro dance class. And then that becomes like, how can we make movement a hobby? How can
Right.
we incorporate this need for social interaction, for hobby, like enjoyment, play? How can we incorporate that? You've kids and you don't have time to go and do your thing. What about like playing in your apartment pool with your kids? Does it have to be, like you said, does it have to be high intensity interval training F45, or is it something else? And like, I have to say, I was on the triathlon. I don't share this story. I haven't like found it relevant to share really, but I was on the triathlon team in university,
Wow,
and
I didn't know that.
I didn't do many races, but it was like a ton of long distance cardio, a lot of it, hours
Oh,
a day,
wow.
swimming, biking, running. And I remember, and so I was doing all this crazy exercise, and I remember going up the stairs to get to a class, being out of breath. And I remember thinking, why the heck am I out of breath if I am a endurance athlete? Now, if I walking and surfing and just kind of mixing and matching different things, but moving every day, nothing like nothing cardio focused. I think I was like hiking and I went up this crazy staircase, and I'm just like one step at a time, not really thinking, letting my mind wander. My dog's already at the top because he has 4 legs, and I'm passing people who are like resting. I realize that they're out of breath and like need a breather. I get to the top and I'm heavily out of breath, but I'm like, oh. And so it's this idea of like, what, it doesn't have to look a certain way, like, and what, sometimes when you think you're on the path and you're forcing yourself and you're overriding what your body is trying to tell you, you may not be getting to where you ultimately want to go, which is better cardiovascular health, better mental health, a better daily routine that you're happy to wake up to. Like, if I have to wake up and go work out in a stinky gym, am I going to be as happy as if I'm going to go for a walk in
Right.
the forest, or
It's
surf?
such a good,
Yeah.
such a good reminder of that we're always sort of looking externally for these answers, and we've lost,
Mm.
for a large part, or this ability to know, that like knowing, right? And an ability to look inwards for the answer. We're looking for someone else to tell us what the right thing to do is, and we have a lot of power, and we don't give ourselves credit, and we don't, I don't think, take the time to listen to ourselves and our bodies, like you were saying. And our bodies can tell us so much if we, but it's a practice, right? You're not going to get a lot of really, breakthrough answers right away, but it's that process of trusting your body again, listening to your body, and yeah, that intuitive movement. And I mean, the intuitive eating
Right.
realm is very big right now. And but doing what, noticing how things make you feel, and also making it, or not making it, but when you are living more, even if you think about it, even like 1% more that way in your day, that's probably 1% less effort that you are exerting. Because when we're living in this way where we're, doing all these things that we think we're supposed to be doing, and oh my gosh, I forgot to do that. Oh, I'm so stressed, and the guilt and the shame and da 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 da. That is exhausting,
Yeah.
so effortful. But it's, I mean, building habits and building routines, and, you know, just your day that feels really good and that you love doing, it actually makes us less tired, because we're
Mhm.
not exerting that energy. It becomes sort of second nature. We're in tune with ourselves, and which is why that habit building is so helpful for people in some aspects, because it just becomes more second nature.
Yeah, like
But
brushing
I
your
love
teeth.
that you brought that up, because it's such a good reminder of like when we're always doing what we think we should be doing, what someone else says we should be doing, and actually hating it the whole time,
Yeah.
that's like stressful
Yeah.
on the body. That's another added stress. Why are we doing this to ourselves? I'm guilty of it too,
Same.
right? And
Same.
it's so
100%.
fascinating. It's like so stressful. It's so
Yeah.
energy sucking to do things in a way. Not to say that I think it's really valuable working with a provider, like you said, being honest with the provider, like I am not going to go to the gym. I hate the way it smells. I hate the way I'm not going to go. I love moving my body. What's an alternative? And finding a good alternative together. Like it's also
Mhm.
that too, is being vocal about what you love and really putting that out there. And I think you'll get a lot of it back when you
Mhm.
start to really value and respect that your body is this being that loves to do things certain ways,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. Like, like I want air, I want sun, and so I'm not going to go to a gym. Uh, It was interesting as hopefully a quick story, but I had a patient that very active and normally before the pandemic had a very traveled a lot for work. So his sphere, his like playground was very huge. He's like, I have a dry cleaner in London, England. I have like my
Okay.
community is global.
Right.
And then it was pandemic, so everything shut down. So working from home, no more travel. And he was on his Peloton, and he's like, it's great. The Peloton's really great. I'm getting cardio, I'm getting exercise, I'm connected to people. Um, and then we were talking, and we were just, I was just listening for things, and um and hearing, okay, what is the source of his stress? What is the source that was showing up in cardiovascular health issues, right? Higher blood pressure, arrhythmias, like these kind of things. And I was like, you're such a global person, and so on paper you've got your exercise that you're doing, you're working, so on paper everything's great. But what about this need for exploration? What about this need to roam? What about this need to be out and interacting that you're not able to meet because of the pandemic? And then we talked about going for walks. I'm like, it's not high intensity like the Peloton, like what he's used to, but at least you're expanding your sphere, because his sphere went from like multi-continental to his house, right? And so at
Right.
least maybe let's expand it to your neighborhood where you could walk around, or maybe just like drive to one part of the city and go for a walk there. And that was like, so sometimes it's just listening carefully to somebody. And again, it's these factors, right? Like no one would ever think, it's like, it's fine, you're exercising, so there's really no reason why there's nothing we need to do about that. That's settled. You're on your Peloton, it's good.
Yeah.
But what about the quality of the movement, or the need that the person has that may not be being met? Maybe you're super busy, and maybe you used to travel and then you had a baby, and now maybe there's a pandemic, or maybe you used to go and do dance class, but now there's no time for that. So how do we bring that in? Maybe your friends moved away and your knitting circle dissolved, and whatever it is. So how do you bring back the quality of what's needed? How do you find an activity that contains that quality, or combines a lot of these qualities, right? Instead of,
Well, and that's such a good point, because I think when we think about pillars of health, we're so like people could say, okay, diet, food,
Mhm.
movement, maybe sleep, stress reduction, but we don't often think about sun exposure and
Mhm.
in our lungs and the air that we breathe and our social circles and community and play. And those are equal pillars of health that we just aren't, I don't know if we don't value them as a society anymore. I don't know if they're just considered less important because they're not like,
Marketable.
well, yeah, and like performance oriented kind
Right.
of
Right.
almost.
Like got my
Almost as
6 units
if,
of sunlight today. Like my
yeah,
watch tells me we need a
right.
watch for that.
Like we devalue, oh gosh, I mean, even I'm not a childcare provider, but I'm sure
Mhm.
if there's any childcare provider or like early childhood education person listening, I mean, I think we've really devalued play as a
Mhm.
society,
Mhm.
how that influences our cells and cellular communication and well-being and terrain and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
So I think that's such a good point. That was his biggest obstacle, just
Mhm.
like getting outside, getting into the world, community.
Yeah.
Um, it's such a good point that there are so many things that can nourish us and fuel us and fill us up, and it doesn't have to be on this very basic physical level of, the food that we're eating, and because we're just so hyper focused on that. But
Mhm.
there are so many levels to health and nourishment, and what does optimal health even mean, right? It means something different, I think, to every person.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really
And
do.
I mean, it also counts to go skating with your kids, or a great winter activity is like public pools. Like,
Yes.
sometimes free. University pools have the free swim. They have the high board, very few rules, which is kind of cool. You don't have a lot of like, and not a lot of people, and kind of university students and people from the public. And that's fun. Yeah, just playing. Like, I don't need to go swim laps, or like, let's just observe your kid and what they're trying to do and how they're trying to feel into their bodies. And like, it's, yeah, it kind of takes and you don't even think about it as exercise, and then it's a way to get outside, be with people, um, family activities. Yeah, there's so many ways to do it that, it's really just like, I don't know. And again, it's hard to like make a podcast about this, because it's like, what if you work with somebody, you might be like, okay, like, where do you start the conversation? Maybe we build with, how might you move your body every day, or what ways. I had a patient, a lot of people come up with their own process. Like one patient last week was like, she's like, I'm very good about all my other things. I'm good about sleep. I'm good about food. I'm great with meal planning. I'm great with grocery shopping. I love it. She's like, but why am I inconsistent with exercise? So she started to write down, kind of journal around it. Like, when do I exercise? What does that feel like? Why am I successful at it? Like, what kind of exercise am I doing? And she loved dance. That was like really, and then it kind of fell apart in the pandemic, the studio closed. So it's like, maybe, do I find another dance studio? What was it about dance? Why don't I dance at home in my bedroom? Like, that's not filling the need for me. So let's be honest about that. It's not just dance. It's not like, oh, you could just do that at home, right? No, there was something about going at a set time, having this time carved out for you, not having to plan. That's a big one too. I'm like, um, if you have to
Sure.
plan a workout, that's a whole other beast from just showing up, where someone walks you through something. Trust me, like, that one is one decision where you just decide to go and show up with the right kind of shoes. And the other one is, now I have to think about, I have to motivate myself through the entire 20-minute, 1 hour thing, which is why I'm a yoga teacher. I never just, well, very rarely free flow through yoga, because I know I'll last maybe 10 minutes. So I'll put a video on. So sometimes that awareness and that knowledge of yourself. And so her process was just, let me journal and see when I'm displaying the habits I want to be displaying more consistently, and let me be curious about that. And it's hard, right? It's a more difficult thing than just go exercise 30 minutes a day on your like treadmill. And then if you don't do it, you're going to feel like a failure because you didn't do it. And we're just going to like, and the way to get you to do it is just to like power through. Like, you just have to, So
That
yeah,
is
and that
why
might be your answer. Just maybe that's the thing. It's like, I just power through. I just do 30 minutes on my treadmill, and that's it. I'm good. I can do that, and I'm
we're really
hitting
good at
and I focus my energy on other stuff. Great. That might be the answer too. But um, again, it's so individualized.
That's why you'll never find me on a treadmill.
Yeah.
Right?
I thought
Yeah.
about it the other day. I was like, I'm gonna go on my treadmill because it's too icy outside. And then I was like, I'm just gonna walk on the ice. I mean, it wouldn't have been horrible, but it just was like, no, I want to listen to this podcast. So I'll do it. I'll go look at the ducks. They were all gone. I don't know where they went, but there are no more ducks anymore.
Oh,
Martha, I wanted to ask about your story. I know you have to run. Is it okay if we just, because what I think is really interesting is that you did a residency in cancer care, like you were or you did your your internship when we were interns at
yeah.
CCM. You were on the cancer shift, right?
Yeah, I was on the cancer shift in our naturopathic school. They had different focus shifts. And then after graduating, I was in a residency for adjunctive cancer care. And it was during that time that I got diagnosed. So it was a bit of an additional intensive, if you will. And then I had to obviously leave and then come back just because my treatment was too intensive. It was inpatient for a little bit, followed by outpatient. But yeah, and then went back, finished the residency, and yeah, it was just a very fascinating sort of firsthand experience into also just the healthcare system in general, being a patient, in quotes, and just sort of where people are getting lost. And this is, I was obviously in the cancer world there, but I can't comment on other sort of experiences in our hospitals. But yeah, it was very enlightening and depressing, and sort of seeing opportunities, or at least being aware of them from the background as a naturopathic doctor, just being aware of the opportunities, and maybe not seeing them, no one was really grabbing those by the horns and running with them, right? It was very about, give people the best treatment that is appropriate for them and get them out as fast as possible. I mean, that was the goal. It's not a bad goal, right? Because that's what their goal is, and that's a good goal. But there's just so much else around and above and within that I think is so crucial to reducing your risk of recurrence, improving long-term health and wellness, considering many people have these long-term residual side effects or potential late long-term side effects that no one really is talking to them about. Yeah, so it was just really underscored where I wanted to put my focus in practice. And I think there's just such an opportunity here, which is why I'm so passionate about it, is because there's so much opportunity, and people just don't even know about it as an opportunity. And it's exciting to me. Again, going back to that, we could, and I absolutely have days like this. The weekend was one example, but it was World Cancer Day on the weekend. I don't know when this will be released, but February 4th. Anyway, it's hard not to sort of, mindset is such a funny thing, right? And it ebbs and flows, and you can absolutely have days where you're totally overcome with despair. For example, thinking about environmental medicine and how it's like, well, how do we even start
We're all
about
doomed. Yeah.
that? Yeah.
Yeah.
assumed like, why would I even try and eat healthy? But
Yeah.
kind of like, well,
Somebody
what
told
do
me celery juice is not the answer. I already spent all this energy and invested all this time, so screw the whole thing. Like,
exactly.
I'm done. Right. Yeah.
But
Hmm.
it's also, you'll also have days where, at least for myself, where I'm there, you can recognize that opportunity, and I get excited about it. And there are modifiable risk factors that we can take charge of and be empowered with, and it's not exclusive to cancer care. I mean,
Yeah.
with lots of chronic health conditions, we don't have to do everything perfectly. That's not representative of health. It's about the patterns that you're doing, slowly moving towards every day. That is the more important part. It's that sort of ebb and flow of building resilience, and you'll eventually have more days that are, filled with opportunity, or at least looking at the world in that opportunity perspective versus that despair setting. But yeah, it's I'm so grateful for that experience, because it's really hard to know what people are going through
Right.
unless you're in it. I mean, you could say that about anything, but it was really, yeah, you just think that and you have no idea.
Yeah. It's
But
like, it's
yeah,
so,
it was really invaluable
yeah, it's
to
like you're like working, in a focus shift. So you're learning about cancer, like you're working with a resident who like focuses in this. So you're learning all the theory, you're seeing patients, and then you go through it firsthand and you see exactly what you're because when we're working with outpatient, like essentially outpatients as NDs, right? So you will hear about patients' experience. You might be connecting with their oncology team, but when you go through it firsthand and you're fully in their shoes in parallel with what the patients are going through, it must have been, what was it like? And
it
then, but
was
then, yeah, you also have this knowledge and you get to see what applies or what is maybe better in theory. And yeah.
well, and it was, I mean, I think one of the greatest uh sort of things that came out of it for me was just that awareness, and yeah, I guess just more awareness of why oncology teams are maybe more antagonistic to an integrative approach.
Hmm.
um just sort of seeing that side of things firsthand, and how quickly everything moves,
Right.
and how many people are involved in the communication, and you can understand why there are breakdowns in communication, and why
Hmm.
people just want people to get they just want their treatment to work. They don't want anything to interfere, and
Yeah.
like I really respect that. I mean, that's the first part of tenet of integrative oncology, is do not do anything that interferes. I mean, that's a really one
Yes.
of the first goals, but you can understand, it just gave me a wider world view, if you will, into just oncology care in general.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, and to see where some of the opportunities are to break down some of the barriers to communication, and open-mindedness, and treating and putting the patient at the center, not necessarily the disease.
Yeah.
um, I think that was, yeah, really valuable. So I'm really grateful to be able to bring that experience to practice, for sure.
And yeah, you said something really important to it, like just seeing what the goals are. Like, I think this is something that this is sometimes the source of frustration for patients in the experience, is that we have mismatched goals, because nobody really in conventional medicine, you don't necessarily sit down or as a patient have the language to really, okay, these are my goals, or maybe you do
Exactly.
say it, but it's not really, there isn't a communication there. And so sometimes, like, as an ND, I don't know about you, but for sure there's a huge part of the job is to try and bridge that communication gap with patients. Like, because my doctor says this is fine, or my doctor said I have to do X, or this is, or X does Y. Like, my doctor says this. And so part of it is like, because we have sort of this foot in both worlds, the linear sort of Western conventional model, but then also this more Eastern holistic philosophical herbal medicine, naturopathic model, that I'm like, well, from your doctor's perspective, they can't, this is the treatment that they have access to. This is when they would implement that treatment. When your labs show X or Y, they currently aren't, despite the fact you're having symptoms. So this is where a functional, more holistic, more person-centered approach comes in, or the reason your doctor said absolutely no turmeric, as part of this plan, is because they're in their mind, uh, they're not comfortable because this is the goal for them. And so
Right.
if we can bridge that gap, or if we can understand, or if we can see if that goal aligns with yours, or if there's other factors, then that could be really helpful. And then it helps you feel more empowered. But yeah, a lot of the time there's this frustration where it's like, well, my doctor said, uh, what's an example? Like, it's all in your head, or diet doesn't help. Right. And it's like, well, coming at it and understanding what the thought process is, why someone's frustrated, where this breakdown is. Sometimes it's two opposed worldviews, and that are sort of irreconcilable. So having that fleshed out could be really helpful, right? It's like, standard American diet, or, nutritional guidelines probably aren't going to work. Diet, though, is a huge umbrella term for a lot of different things. So let's talk about protein. Let's talk about whatever it is we're talking about. Yeah. So, or diet's unlikely to solve your problem, but is also important for you, the person, to, again, it's like really complex discussions, which is why, like, I book hour long appointments. I sometimes do half hour, but mostly it's an hour, just because there's so much to talk about. Maybe that's frustrating for patients. I'm sorry, but there's a
Actually,
lot that you want to get to the
mine
depth
are
of it. You
both
want to get
too.
to the bottom
Yeah.
of things, and properly give them the attention they need, which is why some programs are helpful, because a lot of it is, there's a lot of similarity in the message and in the conversation. And then sometimes just having a group discussion could be really fruitful, because people will benefit from what the group brings, which maybe takes us to what you're offering, because I know you have something in the works.
Yeah, well, I have this detoxification. It's more the fundamentals of detoxification, but that's coming out in the spring. But right now I have a 4-week, it's called Nourish actually, but it's a sort of fundamentals to, and 4 weeks of demystifying basically how to fuel your body after cancer, or how to eat for cancer prevention. It's not specific to, it's really prevention oriented. But it's about peeling back all of that misinformation, misconceptions, how to approach navigating it all when the goal is cancer prevention. So I have that program up and running. I have a coupon code for your listeners, so I'll have to give you that.
Perfect. That'll be
And
in the show notes,
yeah,
everyone.
oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was
Thanks,
such a
Mara.
great
This is so great.
conversation. I feel like we always have so much to talk about.
I know. I feel like we could go on and on, and
I
it's
know.
great. It just kind of takes its own flow. I don't think I asked a single question. I think we just talked.
It was
Um,
great. I think that was, we touched on, I think, a few really, yeah, just prevalent, kind of pervasive things that are challenges for most people, including us. So
it's so
thank you
good.
so
Yeah.
much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And everyone listening, we'll put all of the links to find Martha in the show notes the program, the coupon code, and we'll link to her Instagram and to website and everything. So just click on the show notes, whether it's YouTube or a podcast app you're listening from, and yeah, and you can continue the conversation. And we may have you back on, hopefully, and we'll continue
Yay!
talking because there's a lot. We've even before we recorded, we were like on a lot of different topics. That's why like my
Oh.
podcasts are long, because I feel like at least an hour and a half to get things going. But thanks
Well,
so much.
thanks so much. And yeah, I can't wait to listen in.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Talia.